As part of Sun Salutation B, Warrior One is one of our foundational yoga poses. But with the back leg at 45 degrees and simultaneously trying to square the hips to the front of the mat, it may be foundational, but it is certainly not simple. So let's take the next few minutes to break down this pose. Come to standing at the front of your mat. Step 1 foot back like you're going into high lunge. Traditionally, Warrior One is practiced with the heels aligned. However, that can be quite challenging for our balance. So at least to start, we're going to start with our feet hip distance apart. So make sure your feet are hip distance apart. And then take your back foot and spin your heel down 45 degrees. From there, take the heel of your hands and place them against your hips. See where your hips are pointing, probably off at an angle. And we want to get them towards the front of the mat. They may not be perfectly square, but as close as we can. So keep the heels of your hands attached to your hips and adjust your hips to get your fingers to point forward. So the front hip has to pull back and the back hip has to come forward. As you do that, you may notice that you lose some of the engagement in your legs. You may notice that your back foot's no longer pressing as much into the mat. So focus on pressing down through the outside edge of your back foot. You might also have come up out of your front knee a little bit. So bend more into your front leg. Energetically pull your legs towards each other, front to back and side to side, like you're trying to lift up powerfully from the ground, even though you're not going to stand up out of the pose. That's the base. Now let's look at the torso, and what is the torso doing? It's common that we kind of lose engagement through the pelvis, through the low abs, through the ribs, and we end up something like this through our torso. Our hips and shoulders are aligned, so we feel like we are set up the way we need to be. However, all of this is just kind of hanging out. There's no engagement through the torso. So draw your low ribs in and down. Tuck your tailbone ever so slightly. We're not trying to have an actual posterior tilt. We're just tucking the tailbone a little bit to find a neutral pelvis and to help us engage through the lower abs, the transverse abdominis. From there, make sure your shoulders are over your hips. So we want a straight line from our hips through our torso to our shoulders. Low ribs pulling in and down, tailbone tucking slightly to give us a neutral pelvis, transverse abdominis engaged. So that's the torso. We've got the base, we've got the torso. Now let's look at the arms. The arms are up by the ears in shoulder flexion. So we talked about this already in Virabhadrasana and in Utkatasana. Bring the arms forward and up and stop along wherever you need to along the way, where you can still keep your low ribs pulling in and down and all of that torso engagement we talked about in place. So that might be that you can bring your arms all the way by your ears, or it might be that when you get here, it causes you to lose the engagement through the torso. If that's the case, bring your arms forward, re-engage everything through your torso, and keep your arms out in front of you slightly. Wherever your arms are, you want to externally rotate them. So that means that your elbows are pulling in towards you. You want to lift up energetically through your fingers so that all that energy that we talked about in the base comes up through our torso and out through our fingers. Virabhadrasana 1. Now, once you have all of that set, you can try and see what it feels like to have the heel to heel alignment. If you have a mat with a line down the middle, that can be helpful. Place your front foot directly on the line and then your back foot at a 45-degree angle so your heel is on that same midline. Then set up your base so that your hips are pointing forward. Press through the outside edge of your back foot, bend into your front knee, pressing through that big toe mound. Pull your legs energetically towards each other, front to back, side to side. Pay attention to your torso. Engage your lower abs. Tuck your tailbone ever so slightly. Draw your low ribs in and down, and then lift your arms up by your ears. If this feels good and you want to try pressing your hands together, you can do that. And if that feels good and you want a little more of a challenge, you can extend through your neck and look up at your thumbs. As I've mentioned in the other poses with the shoulder flexion, the pressing the hands together, and especially the looking up at the thumbs, is totally optional and really dependent on how that extension feels in your neck. So maybe your warrior one has the heel to heel alignment, and you're able to look up at your thumbs, and it looks like some of the warrior ones you see in an Ashtanga class. Maybe your warrior one is set up with your feet hip distance apart, and your arms are by your ears but not pressing. Either way, you are doing warrior one. Just focus on building the pose from the ground up. Work on those little pieces, and over time, everything will come together for Virabhadrasana 1.